meeting. Welcome to yet another meeting of the ASGK Grand Rounds. I think we have been continuing this, has been regularly going on for almost a year now. And it's good that we are able to get regular inputs and speakers, and we hope to continue it as long as it is possible. So today we'll start off with the usual clinical quiz to be presented by Arun ML. And following that, we'll have a case presentation from Srinarayana Institute of Medical Sciences. The host for today evening is Dr. Baiju Senadivan. So Dr. Baiju, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi and other office bearers of ASGK for giving me this opportunity. I am sitting for this grand rounds for first time because most of the time I'll be traveling. So without wasting much of the time, let me invite the speaker to present the case.
I think Baiju will have the quiz first. After that, we will.
Okay. Let me invite Dr. Arun Kumar to have the quiz.
Thank you, sir. Shall I start sharing my screen?
Yeah, please.
Respected Anandumar sir, Subhalal sir, today's presenter, Dr. Srijit, mentor, Dr. Prasad, and the chairperson, Dr. Baiju Senadivan, friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Thanks to the team, our team here. Thanks to Dr. Joshi, Dr. Ramachandran, Dr. Pidambaran, and Dr. Murali. There is only one question and complete details in a single slide. Please one word or phrase in the Zoom chat box as personal message to Quizmaster. Please note my name, Arun Kumar ML, as soon as possible. So it should be the answer you can attempt as a personal message to Quizmaster, Arun Kumar ML. Not to all, not as a message to all. Only one prize. The first correct answer in the personal chat box will get it. Results will be announced immediately after waiting for 1 minute. Quizmaster's decision will be final. So please get ready for the single question quiz. Open your Zoom chat box and select Arun Kumar ML to message. This is based on a CT. Please note the history first. This is a difficult laparoscopic cholecystectomy, discharged on 3rd post-op day. Patient getting readmitted on 7th post-op day with epigastric pain, upper abdominal pain, syncopial attack, and bleeding PR. A slightly difficult laparoscopic cholecystectomy, discharged on 3rd post-op day, getting readmitted on 7th post-op day with syncopial attack, epigastric pain, and bleeding PR. Please see the CT and write your diagnosis. Pidambaran always wants a video to be played once again. So basically this is just for learning experience. Just one more time. 7th post-op day, a difficult lap chole patient getting readmitted with upper abdominal pain, syncopial attack and bleeding PR. Diagnosis. What all findings you are able to appreciate, you can also type that. Thank you. And I think I'll stop sharing my slides. So many correct answers. Can anyone say the diagnosis? Time is over for the answering part. Pidambaran, should I share this screen again and show it, or?
Better share again and play the video slow and show the points.
No, shall we discuss this later?
No, actually,
Okay.
So
See,
that
8:45. I thought I'll meet. Yeah. Then we will discuss at the end. No
the
problem.
participants will remain there, so they're curious to know the.
Okay.
So
Okay,
let them
that's
wait.
fine. That's fine. Anyway, we'll open up the answers at the end of it.
Thank you, Dr. Arun Kumar, for the quiz. Now let me invite our presenter, Dr. Srijit from Srinarayana Institute, Ernakulam, to present the case.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, respected teachers and fellow colleagues. Dr. Dayandabu sir, mentor Dr. Arun Kumar ML, and Dr. Prasad Krishna sir. Thank you for this opportunity. Myself, Dr. Srijit Prasad. I completed my MS from Sri Gokulam Medical College. Currently working as assistant professor in the Department of Gastrosurgery, Srinarayan Institute of Medical Science. The topic for today is abdominal cocoon. Why this topic is because it is a rare entity. There is no consensus regarding the optimal treatment and also regarding the selection of patients for which is for medical and which for surgical treatment. And if opted for surgical treatment, how much aggressive the surgery has to be done. So, a patient is a 42-year-old male who presented with recurrent bouts of abdominal pain and nausea and vomiting for the past 1 year. History of present illness. He had intermittent chronic abdominal pain for the past 1 year. The pain mostly exacerbated on eating, and there's mild relief after vomiting. He also gives intermittent history of intermittent constipation. There is history of loss of weight, but his appetite was normal. There was no history of any pulmonary tuberculosis, like evening rise of temperature or night sweats. There's no history of any jaundice or fever. No history of any bleeding PR or melena. No any history of previous surgeries or drug use. And no history of any hepatic disease or peritoneal dialysis. On examination, he was moderately built and nourished. Vitals were stable. There was no supraclavicular lymphadenopathy. And on examination of the abdomen was soft, non-tender. Though there was no mass that was typically palpable, there was a fullness that was present in the right iliac fossa and also the umbilical region. There was no hepatosplenomegaly. Hernial offices and external genitalia were normal, and digital examination was normal. The other systems were also within normal limits. Investigations, the parameters were normal except for the ESR, which was slightly elevated 40 millimeters per hour, and the rest of the investigations were within normal limits. On imaging plain X-ray of the abdomen, it revealed localized dilated small bowel loops. There is no free air under diaphragm. And on ultrasound abdomen, there was clustering of small bowel loops in the right iliac fossa and mid-abdomen, but there was no evidence of any free fluid. For further evaluation, a CCT abdomen of the plus pelvis of the patient was done, and the CCT showed findings of small bowel loops that were encased in a fibrous capsule, as depicted by the green arrow in the coronal section, axial section, sorry. And the jejunal dilatation of around 3.8 centimeters can also be seen. So once again, CCT findings was small bowel loops at right iliac fossa were clumped together in a fibrous capsule, suggesting a cocoon formation with twisting of vessels at the center. There was no free fluid, and jejunal loops were dilated, measuring 3.8 centimeters in diameter. Depending on the findings, we posted the patient for a diagnostic laparoscopy, and the port placement were done as depicted in the diagram. Playing a small clip that was taken during the intraoperatively. The entire small bowel loops extending from the few inches from the DJ flexure up to just proximal to the iliocecal junction were enclosed in a fibrous capsule. So the laparoscopic adhesivolysis of the fibrous capsule was done, and sharp dissection was employed, and no electrocautery were used during the dissection. The manipulation of the small bowel was done to a minimal level, though there were occasionally interlooped bowel adhesions, they were released. Here, you can see the sharp dissection of the capsule and the small bowel being separated from the capsule being done. The procedure was a lengthy one, and there were no intraoperative bleeding. Once the entire capsule was released, bowel walking was done from the DJ flexure till the iliocecal junction. So this is post resection of the capsule, and entire bowel was inspected from the DJ flexure. Bowel walking was done up to the iliocecal junction. So can I stop playing the video, sir? The intraoperative findings, there was small bowel loop extending from the proximal jejunum up to distal ileum a few centimeters proximal iliocecal junction, encased in a fibrous capsule. Interloop adhesions were also noted. There was no serosal or omented tubercles or mesenteric lymphadenopathy. The procedure that was done was laparoscopic adhesivolysis of the fibrous capsule, followed by bubble walking from the DJ flexure to the iliocecal junction. No resection was performed. The immediate postoperative period was uneventful. The histopathological examination of the fibrous or the membrane that was sent for HPE was suggestive of encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis. There was no histological evidence of tuberculosis, and histology of the membranous tissue revealed proliferation of the fibroconnective tissue with non-specific chronic inflammatory reaction. On to the topic, abdominal cocoon. Abdominal cocoon has been known by several names over the century. It was named as peritonitis chronica fibrosa encapsulata. It is also known as peritoneal fibrosis, peritoneal sclerosis, chronic encapsulating fibrous peritonitis, and commonly sclerosing encapsulating peritonitis, or SEP. Encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis is the term that is preferred now. It was first defined by of Shinyakoff in 1907, and the term abdominal cocoon syndrome, which is the primary or the idiopathic form of this condition, was described by Fu in 1978. What is encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis is nothing but the fibrocollagenous membrane that is encasing the small intestine, resulting in recurrent small bowel obstruction. Though the usual age of presentation is between third and fifth decade, case reports have been reported in people who have been as old as 90 years old. The prevalence of EPS in patients undergoing CAPD is approximately 0.7%, and this prevalence is directly attributed to the duration of the catheter, with the prevalence of 19.4% in patients who have the catheter for more than 8 years. Etiology of EPS or abdominal cocoon, there are two forms, the primary form or the idiopathic form, and also the secondary form. The primary form is more common in adolescent females, especially in the tropical and the subtropical countries. And the theories linked to this were subclinical primary recurrent attacks of subclinical primary viral peritonitis, immunological reaction to any gynecological infection, and retrograde menstruation. However, there are increasing incidents in men and children, and they reduce the support of these theories. The common causes of secondary encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis are tuberculosis and peritoneal dialysis. The other less common causes are malignancy, post-operative, especially renal transplantation, liver transplantation, drugs like beta blockers like timolol and propranolol, and ergots, and generalized peritonitis. The uncommon causes are cirrhosis, familial Mediterranean fever, autoimmune conditions, hemodialysis, abdominal trauma, HIV, Whipple's disease, peritoneovenous and ventricular peritoneal shunt, and proteinase deficiency. Coming to the pathogenesis of this condition, it is especially the secondary form. It is explained by the two-hit hypothesis. The first hit is usually a predisposing factor that causes functional and morphological damage to the peritoneum. This predisposing factor can be a peritoneal dialysis catheter, or maybe as a result of the dialysis solution that is being used for dialysis. The second hit usually occurs when the patient has an attack of peritonitis, where the initiating factor in the form of inflammatory stimuli, and this results in the formation of a chronic inflammation and resulting capsule formation. This is the diagrammatic representation of the pathogenesis. The first hit, usually a CAPD catheter. This results in a molecular level to causing reduced E-cadherin and increased TGF-beta production. And on second hit, more inflammatory cytokines are released, amplifying the fibrin production. And this results in fibroblast proliferation, peritoneal fibrosis, intestinal adhesion, and capsule formation. Coming to the clinical presentation of encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis, most of the patients present with very vague and non-localizing symptoms. The usual symptoms are long duration abdominal pain and tenderness with vomiting or other features of subacute intestinal obstruction. Usually the patient will have had multiple episodes of similar symptoms that have resolved spontaneously. Due to the chronicity of these symptoms, most of these patients have malnutrition at the time of presentation. Clinically, the abdomen is soft and palpation, and the soft non-tender mass may be palpable in the central part of the abdomen, which actually represents the clumped up bowel loops. The classification of EPS, it has been classified into 4 major types. Type 1, where only the part of the small intestine is encased. Type 2, the membrane covers the entire small intestine. And in type 3, other organs such as the colon, the ovaries, liver, stomach, or appendix are also included in the encapsulated viscera. And recently, a type 4 has been also been described, which is associated with neuroendocrine tumor, where the entire peritoneum lining the abdominal cavity is involved by the cocoon. So that is a classification of EPS into 4 types. The clinical stage, besides the classification, there's also a staging based on the clinical findings. The stage 1 is the pre-EPS stage. The stage 2 is the inflammatory stage. Stage 3 is the encapsulating stage. And stage 4 is the EDS stage. The main importance of the staging system is that in stage 1 and stage 2, there is inflammatory or significant inflammatory changes that is happening within the abdomen. So it is only in the stage 1 and stage 2 that mainly medical treatment is useful. And the markers like CRP and leukocytosis are elevated only in stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 3 and stage 4 are more of a chronic form where there is less of inflammation and more of ileus. Coming to the investigations of encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis, on X-ray abdomen, the most common finding that is seen is a non-specific pattern of dilated bubble loop, which is seen as black arrowheads in the diagram. And the white arrowhead marks a calcification usually in the peritoneum that is seen as marked as white arrows. The barium study findings of EPS shows ely loops that are conglomerated in a concertina-like fashion. The name concertina pattern comes from the name of a music instrument of the same name. So here the arrowheads show a concertina-like pattern of the distal bowel. The ultrasound findings of EPS typically shows clumping of the small bowel loops in the center of the abdomen. The vascularity at color Doppler is usually preserved. The characteristic pattern of the bowel loops is the arrangement is so-called cauliflower appearance, which is shown by the white arrowheads. Here, the bowel loops are arranged in a concertina-like fashion with a narrow base. And this appearance is what is called as the cauliflower appearance, or it's also some articles also describe as a cabbage appearance. The appearance is best demonstrated when there is moderate coexistent ascites. The second finding that is usually seen in ultrasound is what is described as a trilaminar appearance. Trilaminar depicts the three layers, where the superficial layer is the hyperechoic membrane, which is the peritoneal layer of the thickened capsule. The middle layer is the hypoechoic layer of the bowel wall, and the deeper hyperechoic layer of bowel gas or bowel contents. Here, the arrowheads show the typical trilaminar appearance, which is seen commonly with the high-frequency ultrasound probe, with the outer hyperechoic layer, with the middle hypoechoic and inner hyperechoic layer. The imaging modality of choice for the diagnosis of EPS is CECP abdomen. It allows for the identification of the thickened, contrast-enhanced peritoneal membrane and also the encapsulated clump bowel loop. It also helps to potentially identify other causes of EPS, especially tuberculosis, and any angulation, kinking, and tethering of the bowel loop. It indicates interbowel adhesion, which actually portends a poor prognosis. This is the coronal and axial images showing the bowel loops that are enclosed in a fibrous capsule, and the peritoneal layer can be also, the fibrous capsule, a thickened layer can be also be seen in the above-mentioned diagram. So the CT typical features of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis are: one is the peritoneal thickening, peritoneal calcification and peritoneal enhancement, bowel tethering and thickening of the bowel wall, loculated fluid collection, and bowel dilatation with changing caliber. These are the typical CT features which can be appreciated in a case of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis. The MRI findings are very similar to what has been described in the CT findings, and usually MRI is not indicated. CT is the imaging modality of choice for the diagnosis of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis. Coming to the differential diagnosis, the three main differential diagnoses for encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis are congenital peritoneal encapsulation, peritoneal carcinomatosis, and internal hernia. Congenital peritoneal encapsulation is a benign condition and is characterized by thin accessory peritoneal membrane that is usually derived from the yolk sac peritoneum and is usually present between the mesocolon and the omentum. Peritoneal carcinomatosis, it also demonstrates thickening and abnormal enhancement of the peritoneum, but the main finding which differentiates it from encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis is the nodularity of the peritoneum compared to the smooth thickening which is seen in EPS. It is also associated with raised tumor markers like CA125. The third differential is internal hernia, which demonstrate abnormal clustering of the bowel loop, and it actually mimics the central displaced bowel loop pattern of EPS. However, it is possible to differentiate between the two because of the absence of the soft tissue mantle in internal hernia as well as the relatively fixed anatomic regions in which the internal hernias occur. Coming to the treatment modality of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis, the first principle of treatment is treatment of the underlying condition. The underlying condition that is leading to encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis should be treated first. This involves cessation of the peritoneal dialysis and transition to hemodialysis. And in non-peritoneal dialysis EPS, the offending medication like a propanol or methotrexate, it should be withdrawn, and the underlying infection or inflammatory condition should be treated. The next most important aspect of the treatment of a patient who presents with EPS is nutrition. Most of these patients, they are malnourished at the time of presentation because of the recurrent bouts of intestinal obstruction, which resolves spontaneously. So enteral nutrition is very important in these patients. In a patient who is unable to eat, we can give parenteral nutrition, but whenever possible, it is possible to give, and it is better to give enteral nutrition. The nutrition optimization, it has the advantage of reducing the postoperative complications. Coming to the two medical modes of treatment, one is immunosuppression and others antifibrogenics. Immunosuppression, the main agent that is being used is steroids. The mechanism of action of steroids is it acts by inhibiting the collagen synthesis, and also it inhibits the fibroblast proliferation. And this actually results in decreased capsule formation. However, the appropriate dosing and duration of the corticosteroids have not been established. Based on a Dutch registry, EPS registry in 2011, they recommend a dose of IV methylprednisolone, a dose of 500 to 1000 milligram per day for 2 to 3 days in those patients who present with acute obstructive symptoms without infection. And those patients who present subacute symptoms without infection, treatment is done with prednisolone at a dose of 0.5 to 1 milligram per kilogram per day for 1 month, and tapering is done over the course of a year. The second drug that is useful are the antifibrotics, mainly tamoxifen. Tamoxifen is a selective estrogen receptor modulator, and the guidelines suggest a dose between 10 to 40 milligram daily. The mechanism of action of tamoxifen is by inhibiting the TGF-beta, and it has strong antifibrotic property. So we usually start a dose of 20 milligram BD, and the clinical response is usually seen within 1 to 6 months, and treatment should be continued for at least a year. Coming to the surgical treatment of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis, whenever possible, the entire capsule has to be removed entirely. So the preferred technique is adhesiolysis or enterolysis, and this treatment is usually preferred or indicated in patients who have failed conservative or medical therapy. The other techniques which are employed are limited lysis of the adhesion, resection and anastomosis, or even resection with enterostomy can be done. That is in patients who present with perforation or ischemic bowel. A novel technique that has been developed is suturing of the intestine to each other, but no sufficient data has been provided in the journals regarding the propagation of this technique. So the basic principles to be observed while doing surgery or laparoscopic adhesiolysis: one is a complete excision of the membrane and adhesiolysis. Second, manipulation of the bowel should be done very gently to avoid inadvertent bowel injury. Third, dissection and excision should be preferred done by a sharp dissection using scissors, and inappropriate use of electrocautery should be avoided. These are the basic principles that should be observed while doing surgery for EPS. So what are the advantage and disadvantage of enterolysis? The main advantage of enterolysis over the other technique is it has a lower frequency of symptom recurrence. However, the main disadvantage is it's time consuming, it is technically very difficult, and always there is a risk of bowel injury. Coming to the complications that can occur following surgery, the most common surgical postoperative complication is superficial surgical site infection or the intra-abdominal bowel infection. The most dreaded or devastating complication is the intracutaneous fistula that is caused by the inadvertent bowel injury that occur during adhesiolysis. An intracutaneous fistula can result in gross electrolyte disturbances and further deterioration of the nutritional status of the patient. The management of the intracutaneous fistula, it can be done either using a wound manager, and if it is still not possible, we have to do externalization of the fistula. The most common other complication is the early postoperative small bowel obstruction, and majority of the patient who present with postoperative small bowel obstruction, they improve with conservative management alone. The possible causes for early postoperative small bowel obstruction are: one is the interbowel adhesion, injury to the bowel serosa, and third, any inflammatory edema. This is from an article which was published by the PJ Chandigarh on the surgical outcome in a patient with abdominal cocoon, and they have studied, retrospective study was done in a series of 15 patients. In their study, majority of the cases were non-tubercular, with 11 out of 15 patients being non-tubercular, and 4 out of 15 patients were tubercular etiology. They achieved complete adhesivolysis in 10 out of 15 patients, and the surgery that was performed ranged from adhesivolysis with stoma, to complete resection of the perforation that is bearing the segment. So this is an algorithm or flowchart for a patient who presents with abdominal cocoon. A patient who presents with intestinal obstruction, it is better to take up the patient for surgery. There is a laparoscopic adhesivolysis. And a patient who asymptomatic and or has recurrent bouts of abdominal pain, we can subject the patient for etiological evaluation. And after addressing the underlying etiology, even if the patient, even after addressing the underlying etiology, the patient has persistent symptoms, we can consider for drug treatment like tamoxifen, steroids, or mTOR. And even after starting the drug treatment, the patient has no symptom relief, we have to pose the patient for surgery. So this is a flowchart suggesting the management approach for a patient of abdominal cocoon who is diagnosed preoperatively. So regarding the prognosis of encapsulated peritoneal sclerosis, the mortality of these patients from various studies, they vary from 26 to 58%. So before concluding my slide, a few words about TB cocoon, mainly on the workup on a patient TB cocoon. The preoperative diagnosis of TB cocoon is very challenging. The investigations mainly subjected in a case of TB cocoon from routine ESR, tuberculin skin test, to the ascitic fluid analysis with the adenosine deaminase activity. And also the main diagnostic tool is a laparoscopic peritoneal biopsy, and also demonstration of AFP and culture of AFP. The treatment of TB cocoon, it has good recovery rates with anti-tubercular treatment without surgery, and emergency surgery for intestinal obstruction should be followed by ATT for at least 6 months. ATT has also good results in TB stricture with clinical improvement in 91% of the cases and radiological resolution in 70% of the cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Srijit, for the elaborative presentation on intestinal cocoon. Actually, widely. Now the topic is open for discussion. Before starting the discussion, let me ask you some questions. Actually, there was some film of fluid in the CT, which you had shown just below the diaphragm. Have you done a diagnostic aspiration before the procedure? Second question is, you have shown the video of the adhesivolysis. I think it is a type 1 cocoon, and if it was a type 2 cocoon or type 3 cocoon, would you go for laparoscopy straight away, or would you convert after laparoscopy? And third question is that instrumentation while doing adhesivolysis, actually we are using scissors and ball forces, but the trocar positions you are shown in the picture are coming from the right, but in the video it was coming from the pelvis also. Did you put another trocar in the suprapubic area to hold the bowel? That is the third question. And a little more CT findings are described in the literature. Can you explain on that also?
Okay, sir. Sir, though the CT showed a small amount of fluid collection, intraoperatively there was no fluid collection which was significant enough to send for ascitic fluid analysis, sir. So no fluid was sent for ascitic fluid analysis, sir.
Okay.
Because intraoperative there was no significant collection, sir. Sir, and regarding the classification, yes, sir, as described, it is a type 1 cocoon. And for type 2 and type 3 cocoon, laparoscopic procedure will definitely be difficult, sir, because depending upon the situation, we might have to convert an open procedure, sir, because unlike type 1, type 2 and type 3, it is more difficult to operate laparoscopically, sir. And regarding the third question, sir, we did not place a fifth port during intraoperatively, and all the dissection was done with the ports as mentioned or depicted in the diagram, sir.
And my fourth question was some more
CT findings.
signs are described in this.
Sir, main 3 signs that have been described in CT. One is a cauliflower sign. Second is the bottle gourd sign. But I couldn't find more literature on the bottle gourd sign except on one article, sir. That's why I didn't mention about it, sir. And third is the concertina pattern, sir.
And another gingerbread man sign is there, right?
Okay, sir. I will find that in the article, sir. Sorry, sir.
It is there in the same article which I showed you.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Gingerbread and accordion.
Yeah. And any more? The topic is open for discussion from the audience. Prasad, the mentor, do you have something to add on?
Actually, nothing much. Actually, Srijit has presented very well. Only thing is, even if it is a type 1 or type 2, we try to do laparoscopically. It is better to have see how exactly do a laparoscopy, and if possible, we'll try. Anytime we can convert. There's no doubt about it. Anytime we can convert. Gradual dissection is important, and always there is a risk of bowel injury when we are doing this, and we have to be very patient while doing, and should not produce inadvertent injury. And I have seen one case actually when I was in Amrita along with Ramesh Rajan, might be remembering, where there is a perforated with a cocoon and we couldn't do much, just a laparostomy, washing, and we have to give ATT through Ryle's tube. So, and another important thing why we have presented is this even with enterocolitis or undesciolysis, patient still might have symptoms. He might come back again after a few months. He might come back. So with in this forum, when we discuss, we can get a lot of opinion in such a rare disease.
Prasad, how far will you go for with the capsulectomy? Will you remove the entire capsule, or the one which is causing obstruction? How far will you go with the adduciolysis? You will
basically we want to the small bowel needs to be wherever the covering is there. We want to excise this thing, and the small bowel should be free. That's our aim. This is a type 1 cocoon. As much as possible, we have to release as much, do an excision and do a small bowel milking, so that we make sure that it is free. That is what that's what I feel.
And usually there is a diagnostic dilemma between carcinomatosis and pseudomyxoma. And will you do any more investigation to rule out any malignancy in these cases?
If we have a strong suspicion, but I think diagnostic laparoscopy would have been better, and possible frozen biopsy. Sometimes if we can get some lesions, like there is some CT guided biopsy, if we can take, that would be ideal. Or if there is ascitic fluid, then you can do a cytology. But still, how much we can get the biopsy report is a doubtful thing. But if we can do a diagnostic laparoscopy, frozen biopsy, that will be additional benefit. But for a patient who is presenting with recurrent abdominal pain and obstruction, sometimes we are forced to take up the patient and whatever possible thing which we can do for the patient, we have to think about it.
And Dr. Srijit was present in the Dutch trial.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was showing the advantage of medical treatment. At what stage and till what stage will you give medical treatment? Is there any mention that literature?
Yes, sir. So, first of all, the medical treatment is mainly the anti-inflammatory drugs that have been used, sir. So, as long as there's an inflammatory process that's happening within the bowel, within the abdomen, that is stage 1 and stage 2, where the CRP is elevated, patient has leukocytosis, the anti-inflammatory drugs will be helpful, sir, especially the role of steroids. But once the chronic form, that is the fibrocollagenous membrane, has established, the role of these medical treatment is very limited, sir.
So that means that you will have to do a diagnostic laparoscopy before starting the medical therapy, or do you have any other means of finding out whether the capsulation already has matured or not?
So based on the different data I've compiled, sir, CRP is very non-specific, or the clinical findings are very non-specific to know the clinical stage of the disease. So it's always better to do a biopsy or a diagnostic biopsy before we decide on the treatment, sir.
And how long will you give this steroids or a tamoxifen therapy?
So tamoxifen therapy
or isolated therapy?
Drug treatment are usually given for patients who have recurrent bouts or subclinical obstruction. And most of these drugs, on starting, these patients have symptomatic improvement within 1 month. Though the data, they show that treatment has to be continued for at least a year. So I think after 1 month, if the patient has no symptomatic progress, we have to consider surgery, sir.
Okay. Regarding CAPD, actually, if the patient is on peritoneal dialysis and the patient is on immunomodulators like calcineurin inhibitors like cyclosporin and
Yes,
will you advise to convert to any other mode of?
So I'll advise the patient to convert to hemodialysis, sir, preferably. From peritoneal dialysis to hemodialysis would be advised, sir.
Other drugs like everolimus or something like that?
MMF can be used, sir. Mycophenol mofetil can be used, sir.
Okay. Any other question from the floor?
Vijay, can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
See, the CT you have shown is
Yes, sir.
excellent. That shows that the capsule is completely formed and there is a cauliflower appearance.
Yes,
But
sir.
remember, at such stage, surgery is of limited use and the prognosis is bad.
Yes, sir.
As when you have said, laparoscopy should be done when the high-risk patients have some recurrent symptoms of obstruction. And laparoscopy shows a peritoneal tanning and a brown leathery appearance. But you have seen in such case in laparoscopy?
Yeah, recently we had a case in SVT. Actually, we did a capsulectomy and a dialysis. Actually, it was an extensive procedure. Actually, luckily, we didn't have any bowel injury. In that case, actually, we found that there was some PID like inflammation, and perihepatitis also was there. I was thinking about Hughes-Cutis syndrome causing, actually that is not there in the literature given, causing this EPS.
Yeah, the diagnostic laparoscopy shows such changes, and that is the best time to start medical treatment, or cyclosporin, etc.
A case without obstruction, what will you do? Actually, you are finding in CT that there is a cocoon and there is no dilatation proximally. Will you conservatively, will you go for surgery or will you give steroids?
So I'll proceed with
Please.
So I'll go with conservative management. If the patient has only a subclinical obstruction and there's no dilatation of the bowel in the CT scan, I would definitely advise conservative management and initial start with steroids, prednisolone.
So with the dose given in the Dutch trial,
So, but that dose, I couldn't find in any other literature. So only in the particular Dutch spread, this dose was mentioned. In the other literature, only the drugs that are used in the treatment was mentioned. Nothing regarding the accurate dosing of the drugs was mentioned, sir.
Regarding the etiology, post-transplant after liver and kidney transplant, there are reports.
Yes, sir.
You have any experienced transplant surgeons in our group? Anybody has any experience?
Ramachandran might be knowing. Ramachandran.
I don't know whether we can call it as encapsulated peritonitis. I mean, sclerosing peritonitis. We see a lot of adhesions, especially in patients who had some complications, especially biliary complication. But I have seen these sort of extensive encapsulating peritonitis in patients who are having long-term peritoneal dialysis, horribly calcified. It takes multiple laparotomies, laparostoma, and I've seen one patient undergoing combined multivisceral with kidney at Cambridge. So it's a very, very difficult disease to manage these patients.
I have also seen a similar case. One patient was from Mali, and the laparotomy shows there is nothing I could identify. No intestine, stomach, liver. Only thing I saw was a white membrane in the abdomen. After separating some membranes, we could see the loops of intestine coming out. It is very difficult to separate all the membrane. And patient had in the postoperative biliary obstruction again. And then patient went back to Mali. I don't know what happened to the patient.
Prasad, if the differential is one of the differential is carcinomatosis, would you advise a PET scan before doing a diagnosis?
Yeah, PET scan would be better. If I have a strong doubt about malignancy, metastatic malignancy, then I can definitely do a PET scan. Then I'll take a biopsy and leave. That's all. We can't do anything for it. Even if it is a disseminated disease, we can't do anything much for these patients. Just a palliative treatment, because it will be stage 4 already, and we can't do much for these patients.
Yeah, and Dr. Sejit,
Yes,
between type 3 and type 4, actually there is a it's given in the literature that a neuroendocrine tumor is associated with the type 4. Is it?
yes, sir.
What any reason for that?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. And what are the other associations usually seen with the
Other association, there's an association with cryptorchidism, abdominal trauma,
Mental hyperplasia.
mental hyperplasia, and yes, sir.
and mesenteric shortening?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the floor?
Can I make a comment?
Okay.
Perhaps, please.
Yeah, general comment about the approach. This patient was managed laparoscopically very well because it's a type 1. But generally, say we are dealing with 2 diagnoses here. One is a Cocoon, second commonly in our country is tuberculosis. Sometimes, particularly in those without ascites, the first entry point becomes very difficult. Most often, the bowels will be adherent, and while making an entry, there's a high risk of bowel injury. So one should be careful in selecting the approach, reviewing the CT very well. I think in those patients without much ascites and more than type 1 Cocoon, we should not be selecting laparoscopically.
That's the thing which I also suggested, because type 1, okay, you can ask Prasad was doing the type 1, the Cocoon was in the right left, so he selected a passport in the right left hypochondria, Tenenbaum. So likewise, we can move away from the Cocoon site and do a laparoscopy, but probably in type 2 and type 3, we may not be entering in a safe area. Probably we'll be entering into the sac or into the intestine. So that is not that safe laparoscopy is not that safe in type 2 and type 3 cocoons.
I think a lot of questions in chat box also, some questions.
I didn't see that. I'll check.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Yeah, please.
Sir, these patients must be having a higher risk of post-op adhesions also, no, sir? So is there any role for any wash or intraoperative, any particular lavage or any sort of intervention that could prevent like recurrence
I
of
was about to ask Subbalal sir. Actually, we used to do a lot of solutions. Actually, there were a lot of solutions available in the market. Now, nowadays, it is not seen there. Subbalal sir, any comments on that?
I don't think there is. We used to do the washing, peritoneal washing in pseudomyxoma peritoneal, hypertonic glucose solutions in medical college. But for
Also, ring and lactate, sir.
I don't know, peritoneal washing. But
During our time, we had one commercially available solution which prevents intestinal adhesions. Nowadays, it's not available. What was the solution there?
I forgot. Yeah, one medical representative was after us.
Yeah.
I remember.
Icodextrin, Baiju.
Yeah.
That is icodextrin.
Any experience with icodextrin?
Yeah. I think Subbalal sir would remember. We did a few cases when he was there, and later also a few cases with icodextrin, but we don't know the long-term follow-up. Then the problem was that it was withdrawn from the market because the representative said that it is not moving much in India, so that is withdrawn from the market. So it is basically a glucose polymer which stays in the peritoneum and which doesn't get absorbed. So it keeps the bowels surfaces and peritoneal surfaces separated from each other before they can form adhesions between after any intervention. So what is said is that their theory is that the adhesions form immediately within 24 to 48 hours. The process of adhesions will form. So this fluid will stay in the peritoneal cavity for many days, which keeps the peritoneal surfaces separated.
The fluid filled with the peritoneal cavity we use close with the fluid.
Yeah, it won't get absorbed. It won't get absorbed, and it will get. So, but it was very expensive. Icodextrin was very expensive.
Nowadays, it's not available.
Now, any literature for that, Dr. Ramesh Raj? Any literature supporting that?
I have to look for that. I didn't find any large volume.
Okay.
On questions.
Only case reports.
Leave this case of type 1 cocoon. If you are doubtful about tuberculosis, will you start an empirical therapy for this one? And how long will you
give? One thing is, if I have if there is an ascitic fluid, if I can do an aspiration diagnostic aspiration and do ADA, and if I confirm tuberculosis, then I can just start with empirical ATT. But always, I would like to prefer to have a biopsy, histopathological diagnosis. If possible, I can just diagnostic laparoscopy, and if I can take any peritoneal nodules, or if I can take then, or even mental biopsy, something. And if the histopathologically it comes, that will be a great proof for starting ATT for this patient. And usual abdominal tuberculosis is 6 months or 9 months regime, which generally we give.
And if the patient is having diagnosed tuberculosis and the patient is having obstruction, will it go for surgery or ATT?
See, if there is already obstruction has occurred, and then I have to go for a surgical resection if there is a already obstruction.
PJ paper also, actually, that is one of the papers are showing surgical intervention tuberculosis. The paper from Dr. Srijitas presented.
Okay.
And there is a question from Ramesh Rajan. We had a 12-year-old boy who had dense sclerosing peritonitis with obstruction who needed laparotomy.
That is not a question, right?
Okay, okay, okay. It's not a sclerosing peritonitis.
I think you discussed.
Name and it is replaced by EPS now.
No,
It's not
that boy was actually a post CAPD patient,
Okay.
post peritoneal dialysis patient, and he's doing well after intervention with tamoxifen.
Okay. Even the EPS was introduced by a society of CAPD, and later it was given to the all the types of cocoons.
Dr. Ramesh, how long will you give tamoxifen in such a patient? Already 8 years now. Or how long are you planning to give?
I don't know, because I am afraid to operate again on that boy. So I think he has to continue that. Because
I
it
think
was
literature says
luckily-
3 to 4 months, and you can combine with prednisolone.
Yeah, but he later had a kidney transplant. He is on tacrolimus. He is on tac, but once in a while he gets colicky pain. Once in a while, maybe once a year, once in 2 years. But his abdomen was very difficult. Luckily, we didn't get any fistula in during the first exploration 8 years back. So he is doing okay on tamoxifen. So that has not been stopped. And the nephrologist is not objecting. So they are giving tamoxifen.
Okay.
The
Should we stop
article I
and
have seen,
try?
suppose there is a bowel injury, it is better to exteriorize rather than closing and leave it behind. Because there is post-operative chance of obstruction again and fistula formation.
And when a perforation happens, we tend to limit the further exploration of the
And because further injury can occur.
yeah. So it's better to avoid anastomosis.
Some people advise tube intubation of the intestine, tube plication, through the appendiculostomy to prevent
Yes.
obstruction.
There was some paper of intestinal intubation, which reduces the incidence of obstruction. So there's one paper on that. Yes.
Okay. I think we are already covered all the aspects of treatment, both medical and surgical treatment investigations. Everything.
Can I ask a question?
Pitambaran, please.
Yeah, actually, because there was a discussion that in CT findings, if the CT findings are suggestive of EPS, we will start on steroids. But there is a dilemma that whether it can be tuberculosis also. So how will you go about that? Then Dr. Prasad told that we'll take a biopsy. How frequent is the biopsy give a positive result from these membranes?
I don't have much of experience with the cocoon anyway. I feel like if we can take an adequate biopsy, like a diagnostic lab, even in an abdominal tuberculosis, we take a small nodule or small mental bit, and once they say it is a tuberculosis, then we start with ATT. So if we can give even if there is a tuberculosis, if then a peritoneal biopsy or even a mental biopsy, if we can take and send it, most of the time if they find a caseation, necrosis or something, granuloma, case 18 granuloma, which can be detected histopathologically, I feel.
I think we can change the discussion about cocoon if there are no further questions from the floor. Now, thank you, Dr. Srijit and Dr. Prasad, for the wonderful presentation and selecting this topic, which is rarely discussed in these forums.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, SGK, for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Now, I once again invite Dr. Arun Kumar Ammal to proceed with the rest of the quiz. I don't know, I'll go on for dinner. Arun is there or not?
Arun is there in the.
I must have gone.
No, he told that.
Samajithan, what should I do?
Okay.
wait for Arun or
Arun will told that he will reconnect.
okay.
Just a second. We will, yeah.
Yeah, actually, nearly 70 people were there in the participant list. Now almost 20 people are gone. Now 48 or 47 are remaining. And we had participants from outside Kerala also, even outside India also.
Arun has gone offline.
I think he has gone offline.
അരുണ് റീകണക്ട് ചെയ്യാന്നാ പറഞ്ഞു. അതിൽ ചെറിയൊരു എന്തോ കണക്ഷൻ ഇഷ്യൂസിന്റെ ഡിസ്കണക്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ട്.
Or we will wind up and we'll keep the answer for the next.
നെക്സ്റ്റ് ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽ ഇവിടെ ആൾക്കാർ ആരാന്ന് പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ലല്ലോ. ഇന്നത്തോടെ ഞാൻ ഒന്നുകൂടി വിളിക്കാം.
And Dr. Kurubala is there from Thrissur. He must be having something because he must have got a lot of experience with EPS, intestinal cocoon. Dr. Kurubala, any comments?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I have seen quite a bit of these additions in the several years, but my information regarding this terminology was not there. So it's a news to me. Thank you everyone for giving me an idea about the EPS. But additional lysis, I have been confident in doing an open surgery rather than laparoscopy because the chance of injury to bowel was considered. I was not confident actually. So I usually had done additional lysis extensively to completely lyse the bowel loops and as you have already said, getting a peritoneal biopsy in such primary fibrosing or sclerosing encapsulating fibrosis used to be only non-specific inflammation. Tuberculosis, if I have a stout of tuberculosis also in mind, I usually take up for a laparoscopy and get biopsies. And most of the cases of tuberculosis, or almost all cases, you have that peritoneal small nodules, and peritoneal biopsy would have given the answer. But these anything other than that, biopsies are not contributory. Most of them will come as non-specific inflammation. But one thing I have been very sure about is the distal bowel should be completely lysed. Otherwise, if halfway doing a additional lysis halfway will not give you any benefit. The up to ileocecal region you should go and lyse and leave it. I have not even tried with the peritoneal the bowel plication or intubation, but most of these patients, as we have already discussed, will remain comfortable with occasional once in a while colicism, pains and other things which can be managed definitely with conservative management. This is my limited experience, but this term I'm new to, and thank you ASCK for giving me the insights on this.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Vaij.
Inputs. And now Dr. AML is back. AML, over to you.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
Just playing that CT video again. See, just enlisting some findings. There is ascites, significant perihepatic fluid, slightly high density fluid, and probably there are coronary calcifications and minimal lung changes bilateral basal. At this point, we are able to make out 2 stents, probably in the bile ducts, and there is periportal edema, and around the bile ducts we can see pneumobilia. Here in the right upper quadrant area, that is in the subhepatic region, in the region of DB fossa, there is a collection, slightly high density collection. Probably it is blood, and there are some air pockets within it. So infected blood, or probably there is a collection hematoma there, and there is a probable bowel communication, probably to duodenum, because that is the closest, and probably edematous bowel viscous, very close to the gallbladder. And this is most likely the portal vein, and this is one of the hepatic artery. This is one of the hepatic artery aneurysms, pseudo aneurysms with bleed. So this is a stent in the bile duct, the collection there, and the streak of extravasation. And there is peritoneal fat standing, ascites. And when we reach the region of pelvis, again there is high density ascites, suggestive of layered clots within the pelvis. So many got it correct, and the answer is right hepatic artery pseudoaneurysm with a collection and probably entry communication. This is not a true hemobilia because bile duct is clean, it is already stented. So it's extremely rare, but very occasionally we may get a case of pseudoaneurysm bleed, most common being the right hepatic artery after laparoscopic cholecystectomy. And many got it correct, and the first person to come up with the correct answer is Dr. Fahad. Congratulations. Followed by second position Dr. Shubhankar, and third in position Dr. Pidambaran. Congratulations to all the winners, and back to Baiju sir.
Do you give any prize for this one?
Dr. Ramachandran is in charge, our honorary secretary.
Yeah, we'll give a prize. Arun, is it your case? Was this your case?
See, this is a case in surgical gastroenterology practice.
No, was it? No, I'm curious to know how did you manage this case?
was done.
How did you manage this case?
Pardon?
How did you manage this case?
The first and foremost is DSA and embolization was the traditional one, but DSA and stenting is better because you don't need to block the artery, you just need to bridge the artery. Fortunately, our young cardiologist, Dr. Shifas Babu, along with our interventional radiologist, Dr. Praveen Kesav, they work together even in the middle of the night with coronary stents in hepatic artery. So you don't need to block the artery or even arterial branches. A covered stenting, a short segment stenting to bridge the defect. That is better.
Okay, what was the size of the stent?
Pardon?
What was the size of the stent?
Very small stent, coronary stents practically. I don't know the technical details, but very small coronary stents used for right hepatic artery.
So what about the infected collection?
See, that's a good question. See, patient had melena. Melena means there is GI bleed from the upper tract. So fourth day after the angioembolization, the bleed, I mean, the primary stuff was to control the bleed by angiography and stenting in the right hepatic artery. Next is the how to tackle the collection. We were slightly reluctant to drain it because our assumption was something like it has eroded into the duodenum. So if we put in a drain, we fear that it may become a fistula, duodenal fistula. So what we did was did an upper GI series with gastrography on 4th post-op day, made sure that the duodenum is intact. And then we started oral liquids and soft diet, which patient tolerated very well. So, probably 7th day or 8th day, patient got discharged after the intervention. Then 1 more week after that, he came with non-specific complaints, mild fever, something like that. When a repeat CT was done, that showed again hematomas, probably infected. But right now, we did not take a chance. Our interventional radiologist, Dr. Praveen Keshav, placed 2 PCDs, one in the subhepatic area, another in the pelvis. Subhepatic dried in no time, something like within 5 days that was taken out. No bile at all because CBD is perfectly stented and it is protected very well. And next, the pelvic PCD, still now the patient is having pelvic PCD, something like 30 ml, 50 ml, infected lysed blood, which is coming here, but otherwise he's been discharged with the PCD. Probably in another week's time, we should be able to take out the pelvic PCD as well. During my training period, I was fortunate to get some 1.5 years training from SCPJ Lucknow. This used to be something like 1 in a month case there, referred from periphery. See that time probably 15 or 20 years back, the laparoscopic cholecystectomy was, the mentoring training. Probably there was some lacunae. But it can happen. It can happen to any unit. It can happen with any surgeon. Like undue coagulation in the GB fossa bed or in the right part of right side of hepatoidal ligament, it can happen. Hepatic artery pseudoaneurysm is one of the vascular complications, delayed vascular complications described after laparoscopic cholecystectomy.
Thank you, Dr. Arun Kumar. The prize will be announced by Ramendran later or now itself. And I thank all the organizers, Dr. Ramendran, Dr. Joshi John, and Dr. Peethambaran for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. And I thank all the senior faculty members like Sir, Subhalal Sir, and all others for the active participation. Thank you once again, and over to the office bearers. Thank you.
Mahendran, you can give the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. So thank you all. We had yet another fantastic grand rounds today. It was really an interesting case, very difficult case. Once in a while, we come across this sort of difficult case. Very nicely managed, Dr. Prasad. And thank you, Dr. Srijit, for a extensive and very clear presentation. Thank you, Dr. Baiju, for a lively and excellent conduct of today's meeting. We had a lot of discussions. Thank you all the participants, and thank you AML for that excellent the clinical scenario. Thank you Peethambaran for making all the arrangements, Zoom platform. So we had around 70 participants today. So thank you all. So we'll meet again next month. Till then, bye. Bye. Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.